Welcome, listeners, to another episode of Listen, Learn, and Love, hosted by Richard Osler. My guest on today's podcast is someone I really admire who's written a book I wanted you, our listeners, to connect with. As we started 2024, I've generally tried to do LGBTQ-focused podcasts, but I will do some exceptions at times when I come across content I really want to make sure you, our listeners, are aware of. And Kurt Francom is who is on the podcast joining me from via Zoom. Welcome to the podcast, Kurt.
Hey, Richard. Thanks for having me back on. I always appreciate our time together.
Let me introduce you to Kurt Francom if you're not familiar with Kurt. Kurt Francom, Francom, is the founder and executive director of Leading Saints, a nonprofit organization dedicated to helping Latter-day Saints be better prepared to lead. He is also the host of the premier Latter-day Saint podcast, Leading Saints, reaching 500,000 downloads per month with a lifetime reach of 20 million downloads. Kurt graduated from the University of Utah in 2008 with a degree in marketing business. He ran a web development company for 5 years before focusing on Leading Saints full-time in 2016. Kurt currently lives in American Fort, Utah with his lovely wife, Elena. They are blessed to have They're blessed to have 3 children and a dog. And the book that Kurt has written is called "Is God Disappointed in Me?" Removing Shame from a Gospel of Grace. And as I've skimmed this book, listeners, shame has no place in the gospel of Jesus Christ. So I'm grateful that Kurt, who probably believes the same, has put that concept to words. He's done hundreds of interviews, maybe thousands of interviews, podcasts, and he will talk about his book. But some of these titles just kind of jumped out to me. There's like 10 old titles, but The Raging Love of God is chapter 8. Vulnerable Wounds is chapter 6. Godly Disappointment is chapter 2. And so we will put in the show notes a link to this book on Amazon. Depending on when we release this podcast, I believe that'll be a pre-order link, because I think the official release date is towards the end of February, and this podcast will come out in early February. But I'm going to turn over to Kurt in a second, but I just am so grateful for the work Kurt is doing in our community. I was on his platform many years ago talking about LGBTQ Latter-day Saints, and you did a whole seminar and a series of that, and I still get messages of local leaders that when they first want to connect with this space, it's often the work of Leading Saints and your work to talk about supporting LGBTQ Latter-day Saints, and they find content there. And I've had people reach out to me because of your content, and you've bravely taken on many subjects that need to be addressed in our community. So that's my 3-minute introduction, listeners. I try to keep it under 4. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Kurt.
Thanks, Richard. That's awesome. You're so kind. And yeah, that content we did, it was called LGBT Saints. And I just wanted to create a library of content to help Latter-day Saint leaders to at least have a perspective as they, march into these callings and efforts to connect with individuals. And you gave such a great perspective there. And because as you know, as a bishop, you just have a list of appointments, and you don't know, the person may be walking in, but you don't know the question they have or concern or life experience they're bringing. So it's always good to have perspective. And that's really, a lot of people will ask, or maybe surprised by a book like this. Is God disappointed in me? And here I am, I'm sort of known as the leadership guy. I've interviewed hundreds of leaders across the world. And so they think, Kurt, why not a book about leadership? And my response to that is there's nothing more important to understand than shame when it comes to leadership. Because the way I see it is shame is an attack on identity. And at the core of our doctrine, at the core of our theology is this concept of identity, that even the phrase "I am a child of God" can be so unique amongst other Christian faiths that we first start by teaching this, that we are children of God, and He has endowed us with an identity. And you think from the other end of the spectrum, the beautiful doctrines of the temple and what happened in the temple, that you are endowed from on high with an identity. and even every ordinance has to deal with identity. And so when I see and try and understand this concept of shame, the way I frame it is that it is an attack on identity. And if we don't sit with that and truly try and understand it, just speaking from a leadership standpoint, it's going to be very difficult to help individuals if we don't understand the tool of shame that the adversary uses. And I would go so far to say that shame is the strongest tool the adversary has, and that's why he relies on it so much. It's such a strong tool that, Richard, confession time here. I find myself as a parent from time to time relying on shame because, wow, it sure gets those kids moving and gets us out the door and gets us to church on time when maybe I can throw a little shame out there. It gets people, it is motivating, but like you said, there just isn't a place for shame in any context in the gospel. And what led to me writing this book is I saw individuals sort of just bogged down with shame, even in the context of the church. And I think, no, this should be an encouraging faith. This should be a redemptive faith. And I don't know if you've heard this term so around online or in other contexts, but some people will frame our religion as a high demand religion, right? And man, that breaks my heart. Now I can see, like on paper, how they could maybe come to that conclusion. There's a lot of stuff that a lot of demands at times, it feels like, that we got to do, right? Missionary work, temple work, family history work, come follow me, temple attendance. I mean, it goes on and on you can begin to feel like all this pressure of not doing enough, or man, I'm not keeping up. And it seems like, the Joneses across the pew, they seem to have it all figured out, and they're always here on time, and their children seem to be perfect, and they never struggle in high school, or they never, whatever it is. And we start comparing ourselves and thinking, maybe there's something wrong with me, or maybe there's something wrong with my family. And there's the attack on my identity. There's the shame that the adversary so slyly inserts into our faith experience, and it begins to corrupt how we frame everything in our faith experience. And seeing individuals, loved ones, family, friends that leave the church, that step away and reject it completely because of this overwhelm they feel. Now, when I hear their story, and a lot of these stories, Richard, I've heard on your platform, they're heartbreaking. And sometimes I can't blame them for taking those steps, because they're in such the space of overwhelm and pressure, and sometimes it leads to anxiety and depression and some other things that, maybe you need to call a timeout a minute and regroup and figure that out, because that shame we begin to drown in it. And so that was sort of my hope, and I wanted to explore this concept of shame as it is in the context of our faith tradition and the things we do, and hopefully find where that grace is and what the role of grace is, and do we have a God that's up in heaven that's just disappointing us all the time, or do we have a God that's encouraging us, wanting to give us hope? And instead of being a high demand religion, I want us to be known as a highly redemptive religion, that we find nothing but encouragement, that when we walk out of church, we're more buoyed up than we are discouraged by, I'm just not doing enough. But there's a deeper message, a stronger message, if we can tap into that. So I don't know if any thoughts or questions come to mind at this point. I don't want to go on too long.
Just that I'm with you. It's interesting, listeners. I haven't talked to Kurt for a couple of years, and it's like we both have been on our journeys to come to many of the same conclusions. And maybe you as listeners have come to the same conclusion. But you said some things that I wrote down, that shame is an attack on identity, and I love that. And I totally agree that shame is the strongest tool of the adversary. I never would have thought that 10 years ago, but now I really believe that. And that I love your shift from a high demand religion to a high redemptive religion, which I think is the gospel of Jesus Christ. So I'm with you. Keep sharing, Kurt.
Awesome. Well, yeah, there's just so much. Our theology is so beautiful. And I get that, there's times and moments to struggle with different theology or word set or whatever it be. But I mean, this beautiful journey that we're being invited to, a covenant relationship, often gets framed as the covenant path. But this is a relationship with God. And sometimes, like, I'll give you one example. Sometimes how uh, we sort of miss the message with the best intentions. You think of the term righteousness, or sometimes it's framed, in modern day speak as far as worthiness, right? And we have a temple recommend and being worthy, and that can be, that's where the adversary can step in and contort that message to be an attack on our identity. That if I'm not worthy, there's something wrong with me. I'm broken. I'm not. I'm beyond love. But that righteousness is more about relationship than it is about behavior. And what I mean by that is there's a phenomenal Hebrew translation of the word righteousness, in scriptural terms. And the word righteousness is all over the scriptures, but this Hebrew translation defines righteousness as right relationship. And a fun activity to do, and if you're maybe experiencing a tough day or being engaged in the gospel, I encourage you to go to the scriptures and whether the topical guide and look up this term righteousness. And every time you find a scripture with the term righteousness in it, replace it with right relationship. And this is such a more encouraging way to see the gospel, that God wants us to be righteous, but really what he wants is to be in right relationship with him, engaged in a relationship with him that we're willing to keep going, keep trying. He knows that we're going to mess up. He knows that we need repentance, and that's why he's given us, but he wants us to remain in right relationship more than he wants us to be perfect. He'll handle the perfect part, and that's why he sent his son, and that we can be perfect through him. But to just keep going and keep maintaining that right relationship, and that brings so much hope and encouragement in my life as I mess up or I'm struggling with things, is I want to just maintain that right relationship.
Love that. Keep sharing.
Yeah. So the another concept that explores just this concept of love, and here's the thing to consider: if people are intrigued and want to explore the book, you're going to find things in the book that you disagree with, and I'm okay with that. You're going to find things that you really agree with. But the point of the book isn't necessarily for you for me to convince you to think like me. The point of the book is I want to invite people into this into this thought process of digesting these concepts and saying, well, I don't necessarily agree with Kurt here, but I can see it maybe a little differently because I've engaged with this content. And so this concept of love, and obviously it's in the title of your podcast. I mean, you're a big fan of love, Richard. I know that. So, and it's a powerful force. But oftentimes we sit with love and we think, well, I mean, so if God just loves me, or if I'm just supposed to love my friends and family, like, what's the point with all these commandments and covenants? And sometimes they feel like there's not a lot of love there when you just want me to do certain things and behave in certain ways. And so in the book, I put it on what I call the gospel continuum. And on one side of the continuum, you have love, grace, acceptance. What else? I mean, all the synonyms with that. And then on the other side, you have covenants, work, commandments. And sometimes we get stuck on one end or the other of these on this continuum, where so often we get caught up in all the behaviors, right? And I remember as a young teenager and as a young missionary, you sort of get indoctrinated with more and more things that you need to do, and you sort of lose yourself in it sometimes. And you begin to, and not that this was the intention of anybody, but you begin to define yourself by how well you do things in the gospel, how well you are, preaching the gospel as a missionary, or how well you minister, or how well you attend church, and how regularly, how you attend the temple, right? And we begin to define ourselves. But we can be stuck in this behavior side of the continuum. And what's important is that that the gospel experience should be going back and forth on this continuum, because some days, I don't know about you, Richard, but some days I just need a really good conference talk or a really good video online that envelops me in love, lets me know that I'm God's child and he loves me. And sometimes I need that healing. Other days I may need like a really point by point doctrinal talk that helps me understand the commandments more deeply, so that maybe I can adjust behaviors in a way that will help me become more like God. Now, what the problem, like I said, is we get stuck on one of these sides. Sometimes we get stuck on the behavior side, defining ourselves by the behaviors, and God is will maybe find moments to disrupt our life to bring us back to his love, to recharge, to heal, to regroup, so that then we can return to his covenants, not in this cadence of, well, I've got to earn more acceptance and love, but because I am so overwhelmed with the grace of God and the grace of Jesus Christ, that when God comes to me and says, Kurt, I accept you today exactly as you are, even if you never change the rest of your life, I love you completely right now. And when I feel that, I can't help but look at my eternal Father, or look at my Savior and say, wow, like, how do I become like you? How can I be that type of person that loves like you? And then that's when he comes to me, he's like, oh, Kurt, I have the perfect plan for you. And it involves commandments and it involves covenants. And now we enter into this, as in right relationship, we enter into these commandments and covenants with the intention of becoming something, with learning some things. And sometimes those days get hard where I keep messing up with the commandments. And so he says, well, come back over to my love and just sit with me. You don't need to read the scriptures with all the Hebrew translations and strive to memorize all these scriptures. It's not about doing anything today. Today, I'm just going to love you, and I'm just going to be present with you. I'm just going to encourage you. And then when you're ready to return to those commandments and covenants, we'll do that. Now, you see this in sort of in microcosms and macrocosms in the church. There's, I remember as a bishop sitting down with individuals who were really struggling with doubt, with they couldn't figure out the church thing, and they felt so much shame and guilt because they were questioning. And some of those people did step away from the church, but we sometimes get so stuck on the commandments and behavior side of the spectrum that we just sort of need a break. And I see individuals who do take a break from the church. Now, of course, I would love for everybody to feel comfortable coming every week, sitting in the pews with us and engaging in the church and all of our traditions and covenants and ordinances. But I also understand when individuals need to just take a breath, step away. And I've seen many of those individuals return to the church in different ways, as different people, almost ready to re-engage in the covenants and commandments that are there, because maybe they have a new, fresher perspective of why we have commandments and covenants, and that keeps them going. And so, wherever you are, those that are listening to this, like, I know that there are those moments where you think, this is too much. I feel too much shame when I go to church. I feel too much shame when I engage with my family members who just seem overly rigid, right? And maybe they're super stuck, like, on the continuum. Like, Kurt, they found new depths of the commandment continuum there, the gospel continuum. And so to just know that, like, hey, stick with the gospel continuum. And maybe you just need a season of just refresh and feeling his love. And when the time is right, you're going to have the strength to step in relationship with God and engage his commandments once again, so that you can find a deeper understanding of the identity that he endowed with you long ago. And this is a more hopeful and encouraging way to engage the gospel, swinging back and forth on this continuum, depending on where you are and what you're facing in your life, so that you can stay engaged or stay in right relationship with God.
I love that. I love the continuum, and I love your balance between, the continuum. You're really thoughtful and give space for people in the continuum. But I think the balance you're talking about is really important. When I think of shame, listeners, I think of sort of sin related shame where, there's a commandment broken. And then I think of the shame that comes that isn't sin related, but it's kind of the high performance religion, not doing enough. I don't know, and so I think those are shame can come from lots of different sources, but I love your line, God talking to you, Kurt, I love you completely now. And I believe that, listeners. I believe worth or love is not earned from Heavenly Father. It's just there. Worthiness can go, the temple can come and go, but worth is set. Love from our Heavenly Parents is set. And that's not earned. And not every leader has said it that way. Some leaders have said that, some haven't.
Yeah.
And I'm aware that there's some differences there, but that's kind of what I believe. And I think it helps take shame out and also helps us move forward from a position of strength, that we're not moving from a position of shame and weakness and brokenness in our journey as Latter-day Saints, but we're moving from the place that Kurt talked about is, I love you completely now, Kurt. And I
Yeah.
just think we do better um, when we believe that within ourselves and can help others believe the same thing. I don't think it takes commandment keeping off the table or covenant keeping, but I think it just helps us move forward from a position of strength.
Yeah.
So
You know,
keep
I'll go off of what you just said there, is that on the church's website, churchofjesuschrist.org, it defines grace as the enabling power of the atonement of Jesus Christ. And I've heard that a lot. Elder Bednar says that quite a bit. And I've often sat with that and thought, I don't really get that. Like, what do you mean the enabling power of Jesus Christ? But and this is really a paradox, because I'll say this to some parents and they think, Kurt, like, you do understand, like, if we offer too much acceptance, then I mean, our child will get the impression that we just don't care what they do in life, and that they'll just run off and end up in federal prison and in drugs, and all the, that's sort of the what our brain does to us, that we assume the worst case, right? Like, well, almost sort of passively aggressively giving them permission that they can sin, and I don't want to do that. And I said, no, here's the paradox of it. And this is the enabling power of grace, is that when we feel grace, just like I said earlier, when we feel grace and this complete love and acceptance from God, I can't help but turn to him and say, how do I become like you? What do you want me to do next? I want to be with you forever. What's the plan? And it orients us, it enables us towards commandments and covenants, out of the context of being shamed or doing it because you're supposed to do it. But that's the power of it. It enables us to turn to things that will keep us in relationship with God, and that's a relationship that's really encouraging. So,
love that. Keep sharing. I don't know if there's specific chapters you'd like to highlight, or
yeah, well, I guess we
what
can
you hope
sort
the
of,
book accomplishes. You've kind of talked about that, but it's just your
yeah.
time to keep
Well,
talking.
thanks. The title is obviously, we're both marketing guys, Richard, and so we love a good provocative title, right? And is God disappointed in me? I want people to be, glancing through books at the bookstore, perusing the bookshelf, and seeing this and almost hearing themselves say it. Is God disappointed in me? Like, to me, that is a worthwhile question, because if we have an eternal God that's disappointed in me, that is a very tough place to move forward. I mean, we've all experienced, mortal parents that have been disappointed in us. And there's something about, when somebody cuts, or I cut somebody off on the road and they're mad at me and they honk at me and I can tell they're upset with me, I'm able to just go along with my day and it's fine. But when a loved one is disappointed in me, it just hits it sits a little more heavy in my heart, because I love them and I don't want them to reject me. And from the time we're born, we know we're accepted, but then the adversary, convinces us that, well, your mom and dad are kind of disappointed in you, and oh, by the way, your eternal parents are also disappointed in you, and so good luck, right? That is such a shame message that nobody can really find hope in. And so a lot of people hear that and they'll say, well, I don't know, Kurt, like, I mean, God does have pretty high expectations for us, and there's sort of a game plan, and we got to stick to the game plan, or else he's going to be really disappointed in us. And so on this theme of being even more provocative, I put out the assumption that I believe that God is never offering us any expectations. He has zero expectations in us. Now, people hear that, and even especially parents, like, no way, Kurt. But hear me out here. If we believe what the problem is, we sometimes project our mortal experience, our mortal thought process onto God. And we think, well, my son comes home late. I'm marching back and forth in the living room, very disappointed that he's breaking curfew. And I'm assuming there's a heavenly family room somewhere that God's marching back and forth, because I keep messing up and I'm not living up to the standards. However, obviously, God is an exalted being. He processes things differently. Now, I don't know, and maybe I will get to the other side of the veil, Richard, and say, hey, God will say to me, hey, Kurt, cute book that you wrote about godly disappointment, but just so you know, I was disappointed in you most of the time. But what I'm offering here is, even if he did say that, this has given me a hopeful place to continue going in the gospel. But this is a being who some say is all knowing. Like he knows everything, every mistake that you're going to make. And so if he knows, if he's all knowing, there's no way he can hold an expectation because there's no need for an expectation. He just knows that you're going to make it. Now, this is a debate, a theological debate. Some people will say, I don't know if God's all knowing or if he really knows, what we're going to do. Well, that's fine. But imagine if God the Father walked into your fast and testimony meeting one week and he began to approach the lectern to share his testimony of the atonement of Jesus Christ. He wouldn't say, well, I hope, or I'm kind of crossing my fingers in the eternities. I just really hope that my beloved son's sacrifice works out. Like, no. Like he knows, like it's done. That and there's, Elder Holland talks about this, that the scoreboard of the eternities is set. The game is over. The atonement is done and it's available for you. We just have to grab it. And he would have such a certainty of the atonement of Jesus Christ that he knows it works for us. So God doesn't have expectations in us. He has expectancy that this plan works for us. Just like we don't stress over whether the sun is going to come up tomorrow. We don't worry that, that'll really, really put a damper on my weekend as the world ends. And no, we know that the sun's going to rise tomorrow. That's the same as God. He knows that the atonement of Jesus Christ works for us, and he'll continue to offer it as many times as you need it. And I get that there's individuals out there who can't quite find their place in this structure they've been given in the church. And they feel like I keep messing up, or I'm just having a hard time fitting into the mold. But he'll do this with you as many times as it takes. And even looking at the sacrament, metaphorically speaking, like every week, Richard, like I just sit in the pew. I don't have to request it. I don't have to, pass a test. That deacon who represents Jesus Christ walks over to my pew and reaches out and says, here it is. Here's my grace. Take it. I don't have to stand up. I don't have to walk to the front every week. And there's never, in my opinion, grace and disappointment cannot coexist. God cannot offer grace and then wince when we actually reach out and grab the bread and water. Like, oh, really? Like, I mean, sure, I brought it to you, but I can't believe after 7 days, you have to take the sacrament once again, right? It is offered, and as the term pro-offered again and again, offered with almost aggression. Like, here it is, I'm putting it right in front of you. Like, this is the relationship that God has for us. And sometimes it's years of just messing up or wandering or trying to figure this out or stepping away from church or, taking a break from family, knowing that God will, whenever you are ready, whenever you need that love, he's right there, willing to offer it and giving you strength so that you can then engage in his commandments and covenants, not because he expects that of you, but because he knows those things will help you become like him. So I just want people to know that, like, the short of it is, and my brother-in-law jokes with me when he read the title, like, is God disappointed in me? He's like, oh, Kurt, do I just open up the book and it just says yes and that's it? Like, no, God, I promise you, no matter what your path, no matter how far gone you feel or how messed up your path is, or I mean, whatever interpretations you have of your path, like, not once ever has God been disappointed in you. And that is an enabling power of grace. And I just hope it reaches your heart. And this is a book that isn't the final answer on it. These are just how I've articulated these concepts. And I hope if there's somebody out there who's really struggling to find hope and encouragement and avoid overwhelm and get out of that dark cloud of overwhelm that sometimes you may feel in this faith tradition, I hope that maybe this is a book you can turn to and say, all right, Kurt, I'm listening. Give me your best perspective of why someone should stay engaged in the gospel of Jesus Christ. And that's what I hope to do. It wasn't perfect, but this is my attempt. And I've grown a lot from going down this journey as well.
This is just a labor of love, Kurt. And you're really qualified. You don't like to say this kind of stuff to yourself, but you've just had so many experiences in your personal ministry and with all the guests and the work you've done in our community. To then write this kind of book from a position of just a lot of learning and a lot of reflecting and looking at the gospel of Jesus Christ. I love this,
Thank you.
listeners. I wrote a few things down as Kurt was talking. I just love this line. I love you completely now. I love your idea that our heavenly parents may have a longer view of us and who we are. We know we're literally spirit children of heavenly parents. So sometimes we take our earthly parent modeling and project that on Heavenly Father, and that may or may not be true. And I love the way you frame that. And we as parents are kind of in the middle of a 3-act play, but they know the whole 3-act play and kind of each of us individually and how we're processing mortality. That doesn't take commandment keeping off the table. Both Kurt's pretty clear on that, and I just think it helps people come from a position of strength. Um, we brought up the sacrament. I wrote down something I've said before. To me, the sacrament, listeners, is not a penalty for the past and a chance to beat yourself up. It's more about the future. Yeah,
Yeah.
you can reflect on mess ups, whatever that is, sins of omission or commission. But it's more, I think should be framed as more hopeful and more about just wanting to do better versus a beat yourself up session. And if you've messed up, I think, Satan and shame would say you're back to square one. All the work
Hmm.
you've done to overcome this is for naught. You messed up again this week, so you're back at square one. My atonement, you're continuing to burden me because you're having to continue to reach for the atonement to help you be clean, but he's already paid the price. He enjoys
Yeah.
forgiving us. So um, I think the gospel at sacrament time would say, look forward and say you're one step closer to solving whatever you're going to solve versus back at square one, even if you messed up. Um,
Yes.
and I've, and maybe you touch on this in the book, but I love the Brene Brown quote where shame says, I am bad versus I did something bad. And that's been helpful for me when you talk about attack on identity. Shame is an
Hmm.
attack on identity and says your core is bad. Why it's not, as Kurt is talking about, because you're children of heavenly parents. And shame and guilt for me were very similar words 10 years ago. And at least for me, they're different. Guilt is a little more positive, it recognizes mistake, but it's more forward looking because you understand the atonement of Jesus Christ. You understand the things Kurt's talking about, love and heavenly parents with you. And it's more pragmatic and positive looking. And shame is just a whirlpool of self loathing, and looking backwards and feeling your future's forever changed. So when you say the greatest tool of the adversary is shame, I would have said it was sin 10 years ago. Now I realize that's not, I realize mortality, just one of the realities of mortality is we all sin. Now, I'm not inviting people to sin. You're not
Right.
either, but it's sort of what do we do? And if we're a priesthood leader, what we do to help others? And my wife used to say, what do you think you're doing in the YSA bishop office during these interviews? And towards the end of my assignment, I says, I think I'm taking shame out of the YSAs because of um, helping them understand the gospel of Jesus Christ. So your book is so needed. Um,
Well, thank
and
you.
in our community right now. And I want to send it back to you, but this is probably not a focus of your book or even the podcast, but I talk about LGBTQ
Hmm.
quite a bit, and you are comfortable in that space. You've talked about it too, but um, if you're straight, you're not going to feel shame around your sexual orientation, or if you're cisgender, you usually don't feel shame about that because society is saying kind things about you, and you fit into a heteronormative society. But if you're not straight, if you're queer, or not cisgender, you could feel shame for the feelings that are part of your sexual orientation or gender identity. And the church is clear that you shouldn't feel shame. Orientation is not a sin. But some of my most brave guests have kind of worked through that and realized that their identity is a God-given identity, and there's nothing to feel shame about and look in the mirror. No one should look in the mirror if they're a sexual minority or gender minority and feel they're a mistake. That doesn't change church doctrine or church teachings. It just puts everybody on the same moral footing, and eliminates Satan's tool to create shame around sexual orientation. That if society says you're no good, and church culture's comments sometimes says you're no good, you may incorrectly conclude that your Father in heaven feels the same way, which is a lie. It's a lie of
Right.
Satan. So that's kind of a sister concept that
Yeah.
I sort of, since you're talking about shame, I'd throw that in there, but I want to send it back to you, Kurt.
Yeah, well, and what comes to mind is, when you talk about sin and shame, and in my opinion, shame has a cousin named stigma. That there's one thing that, like, yeah, we all struggle with sin, right? Where nobody's claiming to be perfect, but sometimes it's when it's the sin that comes with a little stigma or a lot of stigma, and unfortunately, that's sort of the struggle that many LGBT individuals experiences, that there's suddenly this stigma, this heavy stigma with their feelings and what they're experiencing, and that's the tough thing to reconcile. And then that just turns up the heat on the shame, is because like, yeah, it's one thing to maybe struggle with you know struggle with watching TV on Sunday or whatever it is, right? These little things that sometimes get put out there. All right, get mad at my kids too much, but no. Like, I struggle with looking at pornography, and I'm and enter identity of I'm a good Latter-day Saint, and I nobody can know this, because that stigma helps helps an individual hide that, or an individual thinks, I can't reconcile my LGBT identity, and so that stigma means I really need to hide it. And so hopefully we can cut through all that and just come to a place where we recognize we all need Jesus Christ, and regardless of the stigmas that are attached. And that there's few messages more powerful than the words of "you matter." And there's you can Google it. There's a great nonprofit organization called You Matter Marathon. If you Google it, you can find it. And they have I ordered these cards in bulk. They're about the size of a business card, and they're white, and all they say is "You Matter" on one side, and that's it. There's nothing else. There's no promotion. There's no website. It says "You Matter." And I'd love taking a stack of these cards, and I'll walk into a grocery store, and I'll slide one maybe in the Ritz cracker box, or I'll at the gas pump, I'll slide one in the credit card slot when I'm done, or I put them in the hymnals at church, because this is a universal message that everybody needs to hear, and hopefully you resonate with that message of "You Matter." And that is where the gospel begins. And if the adversary convinces us that for whatever reason, whatever shame, whatever stigma, that maybe we don't matter, or we're broken a little bit too much, there's no foundation for the Savior to build off of. And unfortunately, many people reject him because of that, because they got this false message that they're not good enough. But then at the end of the day, we all matter. We matter to Jesus Christ. We matter to our Heavenly Father. We matter to so many that love us. And hopefully that one message can carry us through and lead us to hope and grace and encouragement, which I pray that the individuals can find more and more in the restored gospel.
Talk about leading saints in case any listeners aren't familiar with that. Just in this closing segment, introduce leading saints to our listeners, and listeners will link to the, it's just leadingsaints.com or org. We'll put that in the show notes. Yep. But introduce leading saints.
Yeah, Leading Saints. Most people know us as a podcast, but we're a nonprofit organization, and we strive to help Latter-day Saints be better prepared to lead. And so we create content, just like you create content, Richard, for the specific topics that you cover and focus on. We try and be a strong resource for anybody who identifies as a leader, whether you have a formal calling as a bishop, relief society president, or you're in a ward and you don't have a specific calling, but you want to have a positive influence. We hope that you'll find content there that will help people. And it sort of started off as I was called as a young leader. I just wanted to know how I could improve as a leader. I want to know what the other guy was doing, what was working in other wards or stakes or branches. And so we try and connect those people with success stories and to help individuals, and hopefully people will find encouragement there, especially leaders. And or if maybe we've all had the leader, and we where maybe you struggle with a leader in particular, and for you to maybe set up an appointment or send a text and say, hey, it would mean a lot if you listen to these 3 episodes. Maybe they are that maybe they are Richard's episode, because this is Richard. I mean, usually, Richard, you're speaking to maybe a more general LGBT audience, but in our interview, we were focused on talking to leaders, and you did a phenomenal job presenting information of as far as how to understand this perspective, your journey as a leader in the church. And so we talked about everything from how to facilitate a ward council effectively, to how to mentor someone through struggles with pornography, to creating a place for LGBT Latter-day Saints so that they'll come worship with us, sit with us in our pews, and hang with us, because we definitely need everybody.
And I'm just deeply supportive of the work Kurt does. I wish I had listened to some of this content before some of my leadership assignments, but this doesn't replace the handbook. Kurt's not, like
Nope.
going rogue and doing something like I've got a better handbook. This, to me, listeners, is sort of practical application of church, church leader council, the handbook council. And there's something about listening to other leaders that are doing the same calling you're doing, or that you've been just called to. And that sort of ability to bring content to you and the perspective of Kurt, as well as the leaders that he interviews, to me is just so complementary to what our senior leaders are inviting us to do and what's in the handbook. It's just a really practical application to help create Zion and help us be better leaders, better members. So no one's kind of doing what you're doing, and I hope you just continue to do it, Kurt, because it's still needed. You have really good guests on talking about really important subjects.
Well, yeah, I have a lot of fun, and maybe I often wonder, why isn't everybody else doing this? But then I'm like, well, maybe I'm the only person naive enough to step in this world and talk about it. Because leadership, there's a lot of like you said, that don't we have a handbook and the scriptures? Isn't that enough? Well, we have the scriptures, but people still write books about the atonement of Jesus Christ, or all sorts of topics. And I think it's worth exploring these topics as well, just like we explore doctrine or social issues or whatever it be. And so that's sort of where that's our sandbox that we play in. So
it's great. So listeners, check out Kurt's book and check out Leading Saints. Both of those will be in the show notes. And Kurt Francom, thanks for your friendship, your leadership, your kindness, and all the good work you're doing in our community. And great to have you on the podcast.
Yeah, thank you, Richard.
So the Kurt Francom, I'm Richard Ostler signing off from another episode of Listen, Learn, and Love.